A rich tourist spat on a royal guard's face, believing their famous silence made them weak. But when this decorated veteran finally broke his stance, his response didn't just humble the man, it taught the world what true strength means. The summer sun beat down mercilessly on the grounds of Buckingham Palace, its golden rays reflecting off the ornate gates where hundreds of tourists gathered, phones raised high to capture their brush with British royalty. Among the sea of excited faces and chattering voices stood Guard Thomas Blackwood, as still as the palace walls themselves, his red uniform pristine despite the sweltering August heat. At 29, Blackwood was no ordinary guardsman. 8 years of service to the crown had earned him more than just the right to wear the prestigious uniform of the Queen's Guard. 2 tours in Afghanistan had taught him the true meaning of discipline, his valor earning him commendations that now sat quietly in his modest London flat. But here, standing at attention before Buckingham Palace, he served a different kind of duty. Every morning, Blackwood would rise before dawn, spending 3 meticulous hours preparing his uniform, each button polished to a mirror shine, every strap and buckle aligned with military precision. To some, it might seem excessive for what tourists often dismissed as mere ceremonial duty. But Blackwood knew better. The uniform he wore carried centuries of tradition, each crease and fold a testament to the unwavering dedication of those who came before him. It's not just about standing still, he would later recall of that fateful afternoon. When we put on this uniform, we become living symbols of something greater than ourselves. Every tourist's photo, every child's wave, every attempted joke. We face it all with the dignity this position demands. On an average day, Blackwood would encounter hundreds of tourists, their cameras flashing, children pointing. Most were respectful, some were amusing, and a few would try to provoke a reaction, a time-honored game that most guards had learned to take in stride. But this particular Thursday afternoon would prove different. Among the usual crowd of sightseers, a group of American tourists was making their way toward his post, led by a man whose expensive polo shirt and designer sunglasses couldn't quite mask his air of entitlement. The time was 2:30 p.m. The sun at its highest, the crowd at its thickest. None of the excited tourists snapping their photos could have guessed they were about to witness a moment that would challenge the very foundations of duty, discipline, and dignity. Not even Blackwood, who had maintained his composure through 8 years of service, through war and peace, through rain and shine, could have predicted how the next 17 minutes would test every ounce of his training. The man in the polo shirt, Kevin Reynolds, was not accustomed to being ignored. Back in Texas, his family's oil money had always guaranteed him the attention he felt he deserved. Waiters, executives, hotel staff, everywhere he went, people catered to his whims. But here, standing before the stoic figure of Guard Blackwood, Reynolds faced something his wealth couldn't influence: genuine, unmovable dignity. What began as a drunken joke escalated quickly. A bet to make the guard crack a smile turned into taunts, exaggerated gestures, and finally, outright disrespect. As Reynolds' voice rose and his antics became more brazen, the crowd grew uneasy. Parents whispered warnings to their children. Tourists exchanged disapproving glances, and even his own friends began shifting uncomfortably. Then, the moment that would go down in viral infamy, Reynolds spat. The spittle landed on Blackwood's cheek, just below his right eye. The crowd gasped. Time seemed to freeze. Blackwood didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't even blink. The saliva ran down his cheek like a tear, but his expression remained as immovable as the palace walls behind him. Reynolds smirked, expecting a reaction. What he got instead was far more terrifying. The rhythmic march of boots approached. Palace security had noticed the commotion, but it was the approaching footsteps of the guard captain that carried true weight. The man in charge, the enforcer of centuries-old discipline. For the first time since the incident began, Blackwood moved. His eyes locked onto Reynolds, And in that gaze was not anger, not hatred, but something far more powerful, the weight of tradition, honor, and unwavering duty. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the strength of every soldier who had ever stood guard at those gates. 8 years ago, I took an oath, he began, his voice clear and measured. Not just to the crown, but to everything these gates represent. Tradition, honor, sacrifice. Reynolds's smirk faltered. The crowd, once filled with murmurs and gasps, was now utterly silent. While you were in that pub, working up the courage to make a spectacle of yourself, I was standing guard over a history that stretches back centuries. His voice was unwavering, carrying across the courtyard. You see this uniform? Before I earned the right to wear it, I served 2 tours in Afghanistan. I've watched brothers in arms fall defending the values you mock. This isn't a costume. It's a symbol of dedication you clearly cannot comprehend. Reynolds tried to speak, but the words died in his throat. Blackwood turned slightly, addressing the broader crowd. Every day we stand here, not as statues or tourist attractions, but as living reminders of discipline, honor, and sacrifice. We endure the heat, the cold, the rain, and yes, even the occasional fool who mistakes our discipline for weakness. The elderly RAF veteran in the crowd nodded slowly, his eyes glistening with emotion. Parents clutched their children's hands, whispering explanations of the moment they had just witnessed. Blackwood turned back to Reynolds, now visibly shrinking under the weight of the moment. You wanted to know if we're human? His voice softened, though it lost none of its power. We are. We feel every insult, every joke, every attempt to break our composure. But we stand firm because that's what duty demands. Because some things in this world are bigger than personal comfort or ego. Some traditions deserve respect, even if you don't understand them. A final pause. A beat of absolute silence. I don't expect an apology, Blackwood concluded, but I do hope that someday you'll understand what happened here. This isn't about you or me. It's about everything we guard, not just the buildings and people within them, but the principles they represent. With that, Blackwood turned to his commanding officer, saluted with perfect precision, and resumed his post. The dried spittle on his cheek had left no visible mark, just as Reynolds' attempt to stain the institution had only served to make it shine brighter. As Reynolds was escorted away by security, the reality of what had just transpired sank in. The viral moment he had sought had indeed come to pass, but not as the triumphant prank he had imagined. Instead, he had become the villain in a lesson the world would not soon forget.